Hey, M-Critters, Scott Weingart here, and this is the M-Crit Podcast. So, today, Kyle Gunnerson discussing the EC3, University of Michigan, amazing ED intensive care unit, first standalone ED ICU in the United States. I went to visit these guys a couple weeks ago. Amazing. I'm going to talk about that at some point. This was from the Resuscitate NYC conference. This is the first of the many Resuscitate videos we're going to be releasing, and it is incredible. Kyle's going to discuss a tour of his unit during the video. That is available at the MCrit site, mcrit.org/168. There's also an Ask Us Anything we did in the actual EC3 with Kyle, a bunch of his staff from the EC3, myself. We filmed it during the grand rounds thanks to Rob Wong, and it was amazing. So check that out as well. Before we start, two conferences I'm going to plug, and you know I only plug conferences I'm involved in. One, Reanimate 2, the ECMO course, is finally up for registration, and it's nearly sold out. So if you want to learn ECMO, if you want to learn Reboa, go to reanimateconference.com. The second conference, the last Castle Fest ever. Castle Fest, best sono conference for emergency physicians ever. Mike and Matt of the Ultrasound Podcast put this on every year. It's been really one of my favorite conferences, and that's not just because we're in bourbon country. Okay, fine, it's just because we're in bourbon country. But this is the last one because the Castle no longer accepting conferences. Last Castle Fest ever. If you want to go and you want to get a discount, mcrit.org/CastleFest. mcrit.org/ the word Castle, F-E-S-T, one word, mcrit.org/CastleFest. Go, sign up, come, last one, and I promise you, you will enjoy drinking the bourbon. No, you will enjoy the ultrasound conference. Okay, let's get right to Kyle Gunnerson, Chief of Emergency Critical Care at University of Michigan, discussing the EC3, the first standalone ED ICU in the country. I have an ED ICU, but it's not standalone. We'll talk about that on another episode. Let's get right to Kyle.
All right, I don't know about you folks, but I feel like if the rest of the conference sucks, you still got your money's worth. Especially being you didn't pay anything for most of you. But no, I mean, it's been friggin' fantastic. A little AV hiccup, but that's just par for the course. So we're going to start off the afternoon session with Kyle Gunnerson. Kyle's another one of those EM critical care folks. And Kyle has a situation that I think many of us in EM critical care dream of. I think he really does have the ultimate venue. I have an ED critical care unit, but I look to Kyle to see where I want my unit to go because he's just done it right, and he's going to tell you about it. Kyle, get on up here. Round of applause, Kyle Gunnerson.
All right. Hey, everybody. Can you hear this? All right, great. Well, thanks, Scott. I appreciate that. We're going to get started here. I'm going to talk to you about the ultimate venue for doing all this cool stuff that you've heard about the first half of the conference. We actually, same as what Scott's been preaching for a long time about bringing the ICU down to the ED for all kinds of reasons. We actually have been able to pull this off in Michigan over the past 3 or so years. I'm going to kind of tell you and take you on that short little journey here for the 25 minutes or so that we have and kind of give you a little bit of a taste of, what we can do when we put our minds together and work together with our folks upstairs. And then the future is wide open, especially for those of us who go through and get critical care fellowships or resuscitation fellowships, and you want to, be able to practice that in an environment that's conducive for our patients, and we know that's what's better for them. I round up in the ICU as well as down in the ED, so I kind of wear both hats. Here's my disclosures of what I have going on. And one of the big questions is, for those of us or for those of the community that says, why would you want an ICU in the ED? Why am I managing trach patients and doing tube feeds and doing TPN and all that kind of stuff? Why do you want to do this? Well, it's not necessarily that type of an ICU. And we'll go into this. As the ICU world and the emergency medicine world, they've been meeting the same pressures that we've been seeing over the population base over the last 15 years or so. We're running out of ICU beds to have all these critically ill patients that come through the ED. At the same time, all our patients that are going through the EDs, that volume is going up as well. As our population ages, these patients are coming in with more comorbidities, they're sicker, and they stay longer in the ED waiting for these inpatient beds. So as far as the ICU ED interface, when it comes to us in the ED in those first 12 or 6 hours, we're seeing not only an increase in the growth of ED-based ICU admissions over the last decade, but more importantly, if you look closely, you'll see the amount of time these patients are staying in the ED. That's outpacing the admissions by twofold. They're staying in the ED greater than 6 hours by about 30%. And this is a problem. Now, that's a national trend. It also works probably locally as well. Now, why do you say staying in the ED is wrong? Or how can that be harmful? Well, the ED is really good at resuscitating. It's really good about getting our patients the care they need very quickly, getting a definitive diagnosis as best we can, getting them resuscitated, getting them lined up, and then getting them out. You know, Swami put it great. You know, we have 50 people waiting in the ER for their lax and everything else that's, going on. I don't have the time to spend 4 hours really doing a second phase of a resuscitation or the following resuscitative care that happens. And the studies have shown that. There's at least 5 studies who have shown that patients waiting in an ED, boarding for an ICU greater than around 4 to 6 hours, their odds ratio of death increase, sometimes 2 to 3-fold. So that 4 hours or so seems to be the witching hour when our mortality starts to go up in these patients. Now, for us, I have to tell you my perspective, because that's the only perspective I have for this, is that we were looking and building upon this at University of Michigan. And this, when you looked at where are we now, that was where are we now back in 2012. So in 2012, we had about 1,800 ICU admissions, which roughly came out to around 5.5 a day. Now that also includes all those patients that you've all seen had to deal with your ICU colleagues and say, we're only taking them if they're intubated. So all those BiPAP patients, all those patients who are on a little pressors that only had 5 liters of fluid, they still need another 10. They told you to do it, and then take the chance of going to the floor. That kind of figures in with that. So we had those patients. The problem was we hit that 6-hour threshold. That 6-hour threshold was hit probably around 2010. And then we went up from 4 to 5 to 6, and it was up to about 7 or 8. And this keeps going up. So we're keeping these patients a lot longer in the and the projected growth was not looking in our favor. And the other downside was all of our ICU beds were full. It's running at about a 92% capacity. So this was very, very pertinent to the problem that was happening at Michigan. So we had increased ED visits, increasing ICU demand, both from the ED patients as well as the transfers. Another problem we were seeing is that the surrounding hospitals trying to get their really high acuity patients into University of Michigan to receive the care, we weren't able to take these patients. And so they were still floating out there in Never Land. And then we also saw an increased ED length of stay for our patients. Now the question was, is this affecting our outcomes? Well, we just didn't know. So we had no idea if we could actually do a better job, we'd do a worse job, or whatnot, because we weren't following that data at the time. So that's the background of why we'd want to do this. Now here comes the million-dollar question is, how do we do this? Well, just so you kind of understand where I'm coming from, University of Michigan, it's a complex tertiary quaternary care center, big academic, ivory tower, in a nice little farm community, Ann Arbor, outside Detroit. See about 70,000 adults a year, admission rates around 35%, 10% of the admissions are ICU. We see about 400 transfer calls a month. Now the thing is here, we projected out about a 10% increase in our volume over the next 10 years, or 10% a year over the next 10 years. And we also, when we see that, we have an ICU capacity that's running around 92% full. So these are our local problems. If any of you are in a position to think about if this is something that works for you, you really have to do an internal audit to see what the problems are that you're going to be facing. So in 2012, we had a new chairman, Bob Newmar came in. He had a true academic mission of bringing critical care down to the ED. He's a cardiac arrest resuscitator by trade and researcher. He's part of the AHA, works with Dr. Danino. He came in with a tripartite mission of patient care, graduate medical education with far as starting fellowships, and then research with this. So this was all going to be wrapped up into a critical care center within the emergency department. The problem is we just didn't know how to do it. So that's where I came in. I was recruited to come in and help him set this up. So we needed to do a paradigm shift. We needed to change what you see on the left. It's where the ED, pipelines patients into the various silos of the ICU care without having any interface, whereas the medical ICU doesn't really talk to the surgical, and et cetera. And the ED is just kind of an ICU triage where we get them resuscitated and they figure out what's going on, and the driving is all in the hands of the ICUs. We needed to change that to take ownership ourselves in the ED. We wanted to make it to where we're the clearinghouse for all critical care. All critical care comes through us. We get the resuscitation started, then we end up driving where this patient goes. We're the one that drives the critical care of this patient. And we involve all of the ICUs down to work with us on creating protocols and guidelines that will easily make a seamless transition from the ED interface to the ICU. And that was the paradigm shift that we needed to create. Now, we did this by using the lean approach. Now, who out there has used the lean process of problem solving that Toyota made famous several years ago? So this is kind of a root cause analysis of getting down to the point and really breaking down the question or the problem into various components of where our current situation is now and where we want to be. So we applied that for the entire process of looking at how we do this. Thinking of things, the ER staffing, the people who are going to be over there, is this going to, sit in the emergency department, or is it going to be an inpatient, et cetera. We also had to look at it bricks and mortar. And then at the end of the day, how are we going to keep patients or our people's skills up taking care of these patients? Now, when we looked at this, we put through a projection of our current volume with expected, and the design of the unit itself, based on these projections, came up to 5 Resus Bays. We only had 3 at the time, and then expand or create our ICU to 7 beds. We ended up having 5 Resus Bays plus 9 resuscitation or 9 ICU beds. So when we created this lean approach, we couldn't do it really from an ED physician-centric model. We really had to create a multidisciplinary team. And in this picture, we have PAs, we have nurses, we have respiratory therapists, we have pharmacists, we have patients, we have fellows, we have inpatient teams that are comprised of inpatient respiratory therapists. We have every ICU represented by their unit director or their appointee, as well as their nurse manager. So this was not really an ED-centric team. This really was a multidisciplinary ICU team that just happened to live and work within the ED. I'll keep pushing the red. So things that we would look at, such as the staffing model. Okay, so we ended up, going back and forth of what appropriate staffing model would be. This is one small example of what the team came with. So with the staffing model, we'd have 2 attendings on for a 24-hour day, so 12-hour shifts. They had no other responsibility other than the ICU. At the same time, we either had a PA, a fellow, or a resident covering for about 16 or 18 hours of that 24-hour shift, where we had 2 of them. For a small time between 4 in the morning and 11 in the morning, or 6 in the morning and 11 in the morning, we had only 1 coverage with the attending. At the same time, we wanted to have the same type of ratios with the nurses that we get upstairs. So we have a nurse ratio that's 2 to 1, very similar to what we have upstairs. We also have a team lead for the unit that actually had a 1 to 1 patient ratio. And we also could expand into our resuscitation bays where that nursing ratio was 1 to 1. So really, we had very good nursing to patient ratio, which is key for this. EDs are not set up, as you all very well know, can range from 1 to 4 to 1 to 12 to even infantile with the amount of patient responsibilities that are out there. We also needed a dedicated respiratory therapist. This was key. We ended up getting a dedicated respiratory therapist for the ED based out of the EC3, and then our pharmacy, of course, which was already present. The EM intensivist or the EM staffing model, again, with training. Now, we could have done this from an approach of all we're hiring is critical care trained EM docs. And that's all it's going to be rounding in there. But we didn't think that was a model that could be easily replicated. And also, it's very difficult to hire that many that need to staff that. So we did this from a different approach. There was a core group of us. There was 4 EM intensivists. And then we opened it up to the rest of the faculty. If you're interested in this, which we got about 15 other faculty that were interested in this, rounding over there, we then put on a 2-day Fundamentals of Critical Care Support, FCCS course, which is sponsored by SCCM. Now, we know that's just another merit badge, but it's like this is a motivated group of docs who want to know a little bit more about critical care. So we brought the intensivists, our own intensivists from the ED, plus the intensivists from upstairs, came down and helped put on this 2-day course. Now, that also puts, skin in the game, so to speak, from the inpatient intensivists. They're trained to train us, so we need to know what we're doing down there. So we put that on for our nurses, for our docs, and for our PAs. Now, the other thing that we're doing with this is that we have ongoing CME courses that we put on internally ourselves. We do that once a month, and this is going to be mandatory also for the non-intensivists. So this is how we're keeping our training skills up and our education skills up for our faculty. The nurses, we identified a core group of leading nurses. We had a core group of CCRNs that then identified a group of motivated nurses who didn't have the meet 'em, treat 'em, and street 'em mentality of an ED patient who really wanted to take the care of this patient for a longer period of time. We then put them up through formalized ICU orientation for 2 months. 1 month in a medical ICU and another month in a more specialized surgical ICU, such as a neuro ICU or a cardiovascular ICU. And then only after that were these nurses able to come down and round and take care of our patients in EC3. So as you can see, that this takes a lot of time, takes a lot of support, a lot of dollars to help train these nurses, train these docs to kind of get us up to the level. Because our whole philosophy is that in the Emergency Critical Care Center, in our EC3, we'll be able to provide any type of care that you're going to get upstairs. We can start ECMO, we can put ICP monitoring, and we can do any type of therapy or modality in our ED ICU as we can upstairs. Now, we're also fortunate for the bricks and mortar part that we had an existing, this is our footprint of the entire ED. It's about 95 beds or so. That north square up top, that was our old pediatric ED. We just built a brand new pediatric hospital, children's hospital, so we moved our pediatric ED over to that place. This was a 12-bed unit that we had small little pediatric beds, but we had the footprint now that we could use this as where our existing EC3 was going to live. And the nice thing about this is it's right next to our resuscitation bays. Now, this may sound like, oh, that's great and everything, but let's go ahead and flick the switch and you can get it up and running. It took at least, we started doing back of the napkin cocktail napkin drawings back in 2012, and we didn't open our doors until February of this year. So we had 2 years of planning. We had meetings with our construction team, with our critical care consulting team, with our inpatient critical care rounding team, every week for these 2 years. And as you can see at this table, these conversations about planning everything went on for a long time. And we came up with a nice design. So this was, something that fit the space. The rooms look good. The sizes were a little bit on the small side, but they fit code. And, we had these nice big resuscitation bays that open out the hallway. Well, the one thing that we did, which we're so glad that we did it, was that after doing that, we did a full-scale mock-up. The first time we did this in Michigan, a full-scale mock-up. We actually built 3 of those rooms plus the resuscitation bays, and we put our stretchers in. We brought ventilators down, put our ventilators in. We put drawings on the walls where things were going to hang, where chairs were going to be. And then we just had all the nurses, the respiratory therapists, the pharmacists, the docs, the ICU docs from upstairs, us, walk through and see how this stuff fit. And we would write on the walls exactly of what we liked about this room and what we didn't like about this room. The one thing that we found about this is that these rooms are too small. So if somebody would code in our ICU, we'd have to break away the doors, pull the bed out, and then have somebody get behind to get the head of bed to intubate them. And so we said, if we're spending $7 million on this project, we probably shouldn't be having to code somebody in the hallway. So back to the drawing board. So we went back to the drawing board and looked at that, and went with our engineers and completely redesigned it. It put us behind by a month and a half of our projected completion, but that was the best month and a half that we spent with this. So by doing this, we really had some we found some really good lessons for this. This is really empowering. And the nurses felt that they really had an input, which they did. Patients or people who really wouldn't necessarily have been asked before about this came in and they participated. It really led to the buy-in from upstairs. We had the significant design changes that we talked about. And really, this is the first time that they did it in Michigan. And now they're doing it over again for multiple projects. And this is what we eventually came up with, which is a much different looking unit than we had before. We increased the bed sizes, the room sizes from about 150 square feet to 180 to 220 square feet. It may not sound like a lot, but it really is. They're actually bigger than a lot of the ICU beds we have upstairs. So in September of 14, we broke ground, so to speak, and had fun punching holes in the wall, and construction started. Now, the other challenging part of this, which is a whole other topic to talk about as far as having to get through construction project in an ED, we took 12 beds offline, completely closed them off, and had to now deal with, in the winter in Michigan, with an increased number of patients that we see during that time with 12% fewer beds than before. It was not fun times. I was not a liked person in the department at that time. So the department went through, the ED went through various degrees of renovations, as you can see there. And we went all the way down to the studs. So we really just gutted this place. And then finally in February of this year, or of last year, of 15, we had our ribbon cutting ceremony. And this is what we have now. This is the Joyce and Don Massey. They were the largest Cadillac dealer in Michigan at the time, or in the past. They had a family member who had a traumatic brain injury, and they received care in the emergency department and subsequently in the ICU, and they wanted to help out the mission for traumatic brain injury research, and part of it was the care they received in the ED in the pre-hospital phase. So they were very generous in setting up a fund to help offset some of the research costs for us. So before, this is what it looked like. We had a 3-bed resuscitation bay. A lot of the critical care was provided in these 3 rooms. Patients were waiting 6, 8, 12 hours on ventilators, waiting to go upstairs in these 3 rooms, and that's all we had. This was cold. It was right next to the trauma bay doors. As you can see, there's no crowd control whatsoever. Patients and their families, it's not ideal sitting in there right next to somebody else that's being coded next to it. It just really wasn't a good place to be. At the same time, you had the demands of the regular ED, pulling the nurses, pulling the docs away. We had one doc managing 20 other patients out in the general ED, and couldn't really dedicate the time they needed for this in this model. And this is what we have now. Same corridor. Now we have 4 inline resuscitation bays. That's all corridored off with glass breakaway doors. If we have to, we can open up in between. It's all climate control, so when it gets cold like today, we can turn the heat up in the room, and if it's warm for whatever reason, we can make it more comfortable. We can also make it isolation rooms too if we have patients that need to be isolated. This is our old resuscitation bay. It's cluttered, poorly designed boom system. It turns into this flea market. I mean, we had all kinds of cool toys that were used 20 years ago that never been used since then, and they're all stuffed in the back. Seems like anytime you want to collect something from a vendor, you just stick it in the back of our resuscitation bay. I'm sure there's a lot of them around here that look like that too. And then at the end, and now this is what our large resuscitation bay looks like. And we have a lot of cool little tricks on here, or little innovations. We have multiple video screens, and I'll show you in a little video of how we use these. But these video screens they're all plug and play. We can have any type of video stream that you can think of. We plug into it, and we can watch the FAST, the ultrasound. We can watch any fiber optic image. So when we're doing a bronchoscopy, or we're doing a fiber optic guided intubation, instead of trying to huddle around behind the resident tubing him, we can actually see this projected onto these big screens. And we can also, change the vital signs to whatever monitor we want. And we can also bring up images too. So we could put an image of a CAT scan or a chest x-ray on one of these boards when these trauma rooms fill up. And there in the back, you see we have direct access back to our unit. And for our ECMO enthusiasts, Zach, Joe, Scott, what do you see there in the back? Yeah, now we have our own ECMO pump. We just got this circuit set up here a few weeks ago. So now we're ready for doing our ECPR, and that's all going to live down in the ED. And we're actually in the process of doing an ED-based ECMO team to where for our potential patients that fit criteria, we'll end up doing ECP ourselves, and we'll be managing ECMO for at least 24 hours in these patients before they go to the inpatient ICU service, or we'll withdraw if they find something that's catastrophic. This is what the unit looks like. This is one view down in the hallways. Again, it's a 9-bed ICU. It's staffed with our nurses. This is within the Department of Emergency Medicine, which is key, in my opinion. It's key. We maintain control of this. This is not an inpatient ICU. We don't accept patients from outside ICUs in order to go up to our inpatient ICU. These are ED to ED transfers of very high acuity patients that need the type of care. The nice thing about it is when we have decrease in our census, such as nighttime, when it seems to be a little bit low and the main ED gets killed, we have the capacity to take and cherry pick and bring some of those patients from the waiting room back there, and we can, turn those patients out quickly so they're not waiting. So we can actually help the department in more ways from the critical care standpoint. Again, here's what our patient rooms looked like before. This was on the left side, the largest room that we had over there in that pediatric side. And now this is one of our larger rooms. It's a 220 square foot room that we have dialysis booms or dialysis bibs in the wall that we can run dialysis in there as well. So what are the results about this? Now that this is up and running, now that we've had this model going, we opened our doors in February, but as far as our nursing staff ratio, we really weren't up to speed until about May. But, since that time, we have seen a few trends. We've seen a few things, and I'll let you in on a few of them. So during this time frame, over 2015 to 2014, 2015 is on the left, we've seen an increase in our volume. So keep this in mind. The volume of the ED is continuing to go up. Okay, we're seeing an increase in our volume by 4 to 4.5%. This has been really consistent. Along with that is the same acuity, the same high critical care volume that's going up as well. Since February, we've seen around 2,200 patients. This is up until January 1st. All comers, all people that have come through the EC3, there's been about 30% admitted to the ICU. 60% have been downgraded to go to the floor, and 9%, this is something that just floored us. We're able to send 9% of these patients home. And 0.5%, or about 20 patients or so, have actually died. And the ones that have died have been palliative care patients. Before, the palliative care patients would come in, they'd be intubated in the field, they'd go to the ICU, they'd be made comfort measures only, and then they'd pass away upstairs. We're able to provide that level of care now in the ED. They come in, the same thing. We would extubate them in the ED, bring their family members in a nice, controlled, quiet environment, provide the same type of service palliative care can provide. And if they happen to live longer than what we'd expect in the ED, we can arrange for outpatient hospice. They don't have to touch the inpatient world at all. So we see about, on average, 7 EC3 patients a day, and 25% of our patients that would have been admitted to an ICU go to a floor now, of these really highly acute intubated type patients, or on pressors, or on a mode of mechanical, like non-invasive ventilation. About 2.2 patients a day or so are being kept out of an ICU, and that relates to the bean counters of the health system. So when you start doing the math, we're providing about 652 patients in this model are being kept out of the ICU a year, projected out. That, when you think about a length of stay, roughly in an ICU is about, the median is about 2% or 2 days, with a mean of around 4 days. We're saving the hospital, up until now, about 1,600 bed days, ICU bed days a year. This is projected to go over 2,000 ICU bed days a year. So this, from an institutional standpoint and from a capacity standpoint, is key. This is where we're proving our worth. Now, of course, we're taking great care of our patients. Our patients are loving, they're doing well, but the institution is saying we're saving all these precious resources upstairs. So this is just another way of looking at it. If you look at our 2014 ICU admission rate versus 2015 admission rate, we've seen a 16% decrease in our ED to ICU admissions. Now, this is one of the things that we have. It's very nice to be data-driven, and Michigan is we're very fortunate to have a lot of data-driven. So I get these monthly reports that basically tells us how well we're doing and what and what our patient, status was. And this is EC3 progression to date. And you can see here in the yellow, the minimum, this is a very conservative number of ICU bed days that were created around 652, with, again, the median ICU bed days saved are, again, around 1,700. So this is the type of report that we follow. We keep up with this, every month and see if we can see trends and identify patterns. The other part of this story is what's happening upstairs. So you might think we're getting, all these beds are being averted from upstairs, and so these ICUs are being underfilled. Well, they're not. Because at the same time we're decreasing our admissions upstairs, they're able to take more patients from outside. So when you look at their capacity, they haven't changed. Their census hasn't changed at all. Where are they coming from? Well, they're coming from outside. So during the same time frame, we've seen almost a 27% increase in outside hospital transfers. And this is really what, it makes the hospital administrators, salivate, because this is the capacity that we're creating by doing this. Some of the disease-specific patterns that we've seen with this, of course, the sepsis patients, we're able to see these patients and take care of them longer, give that 6 hours, that 12 hours that they need to come off their pressors, and these patients now are going to the floor, in a large chunks. We're getting very good at using non-invasive positive pressure ventilation. Before, we thought we were good. We put them on BiPAP. We had some success stories in our COPDers, our CHFers, but until we really looked at it, and we kept these patients overnight. We kept these patients an average of 12 to 18 hours. We've really gotten good at this. And we've really saved a lot of patients going to an ICU that wouldn't have stayed there more than another 24 hours to come off their BiPAP. DKA is another one. We used to admit a lot of our patients to the hospital with DKA. We're sending about 9% of them home. GI bleeds, we're scoping them now in the ER and working on a subtraumatic or uncomplicated traumatic subarachnoid protocol. These are the pathways that we put together, and I'm just going to end it with a little tour. Since I can't bring you there, I'll bring Ann Arbor to you. All right.
Just perfect. Fantastic stuff. How many takes did it get you to get to that video being shot?
No comment.
Yeah, all right. So I wanted you guys to see this because I think this is the future. I think this is where emergency medicine should be leading, and now you have a vision of what that could look like. There were a few questions about cost, but I think you hit them in the course of the later part of your presentation. One question that did still remain, how do you handle sign-outs to the ICU if they are going to take the patient? Do you have a dedicated means of making sure no information is missed?
Yeah, so we document into CERN or into Epic, and our notes are patterned after the ICU notes. And so they're pre-populated with all the systems and the organ-based process that you'd see upstairs. And we make an effort to make sure those are populated before our patient goes upstairs. We also have the fellow come down and actually round with us before the patient goes up, so at least the fellow is in the loop. The intern residents, medicine residents, they rarely come down to the ED, and so that's your typical phone call, and we leave it up to the fellow to hopefully relay the message.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Round of applause for Kyle Gunnerson.